Hello and welcome to another episode of the Omnibus Podcast, Minnesota's best weekly breakdown of political news inside and outside the Capitol. I'm your host, Jeremy Munson, former state representative from southern Minnesota, and as usual, we're joined by State Representative Walter Hudson of District 30A. Walter, I'm going to jump right into a few bills this week. People have been messaging me in the last week how they like a breakdown of kind of what these bills are about and some of the arguments for and against. And we'll try really hard to come up with arguments for this next bill. This is the price gouging bill that Representative Stevenson has, to basically put price caps on certain products when they see that there's an adverse market disruption. And this is the devil's in the details in this bill, but you're basically having the government price fix for certain items when the price of that item goes up by a certain percent over a period of time. And this, of course, is being pitched for the pharmaceutical industry, for insulin. But if there's a supply chain disruption, which we've seen a lot of, because a lot of businesses use this just-in-time inventory, just-in-time delivery, if there's a disruption, then it could apply to a whole slew of products, even though that retailer isn't necessarily price gouging. They're just marking it up, 20, 30% as usual, but their price goes up. So how do you see this bill? I mean, what are the arguments that you've seen in committees for and against this bill?
Well, this bill hasn't come through any committee that I sit on. I can imagine what their arguments are going to be. They're going to be emotional manipulation based upon hypothetical moral crises. And basically there are, and it's, the remarks that I plan to give on the House floor tomorrow when we debate this is because I'm adopting a different strategy in my floor speeches than I started off with at the beginning of session. At the beginning of session, I was very much fire and brimstone. You guys suck. This is a terrible idea. And I still believe all those things, and I'm more than willing to say them on venues such as this. But on the House floor, I think it's more interesting to try to adopt their moral premises and then argue how their bill fails based upon their own idea of what they think they're trying to accomplish. And so in this case, my best guess as to what their argument for the bill is that and the language is right there in the bill in terms of how they define things as being obscene or what's some of the language that they use?
Yeah, let me just
unconscionably excessive prices.
Yeah, and just to be clear, what is not unconscionably excessive price is if the price of a good does not increase more than 25% in a 2-month period. So in other words, unconsciously excessive is if it goes up more than 25% within a 2-month period, then the government can come in and start fining retailers for selling a product for a price that is increased.
Right. Yeah, and so the idea, I mean, and it's implicit there in the language, right? Is they're saying that it's unconscionable that you would sell a product or service at a particular price under particular circumstances. And so what is it that they're trying to affect with that? Well, they would say that they're trying to ensure that in a crisis, in one of these abnormal market disruptions, Minnesotans don't have to pay more than 25% for a particular item. They don't have to pay more than 25% increase from what that item was up to 2 months in the past. Okay, that's your goal. That's what you're trying to affect. Fair enough. Here's what's actually going to happen. What's actually going to happen is that Minnesotan who you're trying to protect isn't going to get that product or service at all. Because actors in the market are not setting their prices based upon some opportunistic greed to take advantage of a particular situation or circumstances. They are setting their prices based upon the market conditions that they find themselves in, supply and demand, basic economics 101. And so if it is worth my time as a distributor or wholesaler or retailer, a guy with a pickup truck who's driving gallon bottles of water from Texas to Minnesota, if it's worth my time to do that at $125 per gallon of water, but it's not worth my time to do that at $100 per gallon, and you tell me that I can't jack my price up to 125 because in your mind that's unconscionable, well then guess what? I'm just not going to do it, which means that that truck full of gallons of water isn't going to come to Minnesota. And so what you're trying to affect is you don't want a poor Minnesotan, to have to pay $125 for that gallon. Well, great. Congratulations. You've insured that. You've insured that they're not going to have to pay that money. You have also ensured that they're not going to have water.
Yeah.
That's going to be the effect of this bill.
And let me bring up another example of a product that fluctuates in price pretty drastically, and that's gas. Both gasoline and natural gas and propane. We have seen many spikes in these prices where they can go up 25% within 2 weeks. And so what the end result of this legislation would be is that it would prevent retailers from lowering the cost. So if the gas prices go up 15% in 2 weeks, and then they go down another 10%, that retailer will not lower the price of that good for fear that the price would spike again and make up that 25% gap. So it doesn't say that you can't lower, so it would prevent retailers from lowering the prices and following the natural market of it. It's like in St. Paul, where they're trying to put caps on landlords from increasing the rent more than 7%. Well, there's times where, it's 7% a year. So if they think there might be a 10% increase in 2 years, they're going to raise the rent now so that they don't have to hit that 7% threshold, and they'll always raise the rent 5, 6, 7% for fear that if they do have to make a significant jump or they want to make improvements to their property, that they're not caught in that limitation where government is trying to manhandle the prices. This bill would have broad implications on so much of our retail and even wholesale industry in Minnesota, and it would enable Ellison and his goons to go around and hand out administrative penalties. The fine, if you were caught selling a product at more than eggs or whatever at more than 25%, would be $1,000 per sale or transaction, with a maximum penalty of $25,000 per day. So these are serious offenses. I don't know what, people are going to take it to court like they did when they were shutting down restaurants and things like that. But this is just an ugly thing. And this is up to the governor to unilaterally declare when this state of emergency is. And it's just a bad bill all around.
Yeah, you're so right. There are many facets to it that are bad, and I appreciate you highlighting that this further empowers the governor. After we just saw the abuse that was made of emergency powers by Governor Tim Walz during the pandemic, now we're going to hand him even more power. We're going to hand him the power to determine prices, to determine that we're entering a zone where prices can't go higher or lower. And to go back to your analysis regarding, retailers in the example you use, gas stations being deterred from lowering their prices when the market would otherwise dictate that, because for fear of getting themselves stuck in a situation where they're going to be losing money down the road. That's a problem, because what price it does, what the function, the purpose that price serves, it's communication. That's what it is. Price is a communication to producers and to consumers regarding what action they should take. It's subjective information in the sense that that gallon of water that I was talking about, it might be worth $5 to me, but it might not be worth $5 to you. and I'm bringing my individual contextual needs, tastes, values, circumstances to the determination of whether or not it's worth $5 to me. It might be worth $5 to me. It might not be worth $5 to you. What happens when you interrupt that price mechanism by saying it's going to stay at $5, it can't go up and it can't go down, is now people don't have the accurate information that they need to determine whether or not they value that product. Okay. And so as a producer of gallons of water, I don't know whether I should be ramping up my production or slowing it down. I don't know whether I should be investing more or divesting. As a consumer, I don't know if I should be stockpiling or if I can get by with what I've got for now, because you have taken the mechanism of price, which communicates that to me, and you have put your thumb on the scale and you have distorted the signal. It's like it's like an old TV signal. When you got off the frequency a little bit, you start to get this white noise in the video signal, right? Or on a radio station, you get off a few degrees off from the exact frequency that you need to be on. You start to get the white noise. You can't hear the signal strongly. It's the same thing with price. And that's what this does, is you're introducing noise into the signal, which prohibits people, deters people from being able to take the type of action that is proper and appropriate for them and their circumstances on both sides of the transaction, both producers and consumers. And what that results in is it results in surpluses of inventory and shortages of inventory. And more often than not, it's going to end up on the shortage side. When people need things, certainly in what this bill addresses, so-called adverse market disruptions, emergencies, natural disasters, man-made disasters, you're going to have shortages, because the purpose of increases in price is a signal to the producers of, hey, we're ringing the dinner bell. You need to be ramping up production because there's money to be made. That's what an increase in price signals. And it lights a fire under people's butts to get the necessary items and services to market so that they can get a piece of the pie. Okay. If you cap it off, then you are cutting off that signal, and people are not going to react in the ways that they need to in order to actually save people's lives in an emergency.
All right. I need to disclose part of the bill that I didn't cover in the first part when we were talking about this, in the exceptions to the unconscionably excessive price. It does give a carve out to allow people like gasoline, where market fluctuations, it says if the price is consistent with market fluctuations for commodity markets. So you could explain, well, hey, the price went up. It also says that if you have a contract price, in other words, you're a retailer and you've forward contracted with your gasoline for a really high price, even though the commodities price comes down, you may be locked into buying that. That may give you an out. It's kind of, I don't know if it's written, clear enough that it would give that retailer an out, but it does have some carve outs for that. I don't know if it would necessarily always apply, but obviously, if there's huge demand, that drives up price, and that is what this bill is written for. It talks about what essential consumer goods or services are, and that are necessary for health, safety, and welfare of the public, including without limitation, food, water, fuel, gasoline, shelter, transportation, healthcare services, pharmaceuticals, medical, personal hygiene, sanitation, and cleaning supplies. Think about those alcohol-based cleaners during COVID, how expensive they were. Masks, right? The cost of masks going up. Could they step in and smack down retailers that are charging, $3 for a paper mask? But I also look at this and say, well, what if Minneapolis hosts the Super Bowl again? This talks about housing, and it specifically says unless your cost as a retailer, is justified in the increased prices, how could hotel rooms go for $89 one week and then the next week during the Super Bowl go for $600? Wouldn't that create an abnormal market disruption with having 100,000 people descend on the Twin Cities and want hotel rooms? This covers housing. Does that mean you can't charge more? What about resorts up north that have price changes? Would they be covered under this protection for seasonality, for seasonal fluctuations? Who knows? This could have broad implications. And just like the health emergency legislation that Republicans passed, 20 years ago that allowed the governor to lock down the state during COVID, it doesn't come back to the legislature for approval. If the governor wants to declare an abnormal market disruption, there should be language in this bill that says within 48 hours of declaring this crisis, the legislature must approve this to continue. That type of, because you're basically giving up your authority as a legislature to allow somebody else to sit and kind of determine what the laws should be and hand out fines. This should come back to the legislature for approval. There should be an amendment on the floor tomorrow that says the legislature must approve this or it dies.
Yeah, I don't know if that's one of the amendments that ultimately will end up being attached, but it is definitely a good idea. Because, this is, aside from just being a bad idea overall, like this is not a good idea to interfere with price in any way. But the power that this vests in the executive, and this is the trajectory of everything, which is giving more and more power to one dude in an office somewhere, whether it's the governor or the attorney general. And then, of course, naturally, just like we saw under the pandemic with Tim Walz, it's going to be executed arbitrarily and with favoritism and with carve-outs for friends. Minnesota's largest candy store, again, comes to mind as a prime example of what can you even attempt to make an objective fact-based case for why Minnesota's largest candy store should have been exempt to any of the shutdown regulations as opposed to literally any other type of business?
Well, they were a grocery store. That's how they qualified.
Right.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that won't be covered in this bill on unconscionably excessive prices is the cost of a bottle of water. Because if Sydney Jordan has her way, legislation will pass this year that completely bans the sale of plastic bottles of water in the state of Minnesota. Yes. And I'm gonna give a little bit of defense here because I went, we do a little bit of traveling. When we go to hotels, I like to buy my bottles of water and bring them there as opposed to paying $5 for a bottle of water. And I swing by a convenience store and I go into the refrigerator area where the pops are, and I look at a cost of a plastic bottle of water, and it's $1.50 to $2 for a bottle of water. But on the shelf, they have a pack of 32 bottles for like $2.99. You can buy these enormous packs of very thin-walled plastic bottles for just a few bucks. It's a great deal. And I mean, maybe Minnesotans buy too many of them, whatever. But the problem is this bill is being brought forward under the guise of preventing microplastics in our water supply. That's what we hear about all the time, is plastic straws and plastic bottles that are destroying the environment. But a study came out a few years ago. It was down in Florida. They were looking at microplastics in the water on the beaches, and they found that 90% of the microplastics in the ocean around the shoreline were not from straws or plastic bottles. They were from plastic clothing, from yoga pants and fleece and you can't buy a pair of jeans that don't have plastic in them. And every time you put them through the wash, the water that goes out from your washing machine that goes through the lint trap, the microplastics don't get caught in the lint trap. Instead, they go into the water supply, into the sewers, and the city's municipal water treatment facility can't take out microplastics, so it puts it back in the water supply or it discharges it into a river. And that's how we end up with so much microplastics in the lakes and rivers in Minnesota and in the ocean. I mean, yes, there's chunks of plastic floating out there too, dumped over from cruise ships or whatever. But the majority of microplastics come from clothing. And I don't see anything in here about banning yoga pants or fleece and trying to buy clothing that doesn't have plastic in it. Not that I'm asking for that, but if you want to solve the problem of microplastics, it's plastic clothing, not bottles of water.
Well, and again, they love the word externality. That's their favorite word, if they're smart enough to even know what that means. And a few of them are. But they're always magnifying the impact of one identified externality while completely ignoring the externality that they're creating with their solution. Okay. So you need to tell me why microplastics are a problem. Like, I get it. It's artificial. We should probably do something to address that issue. And I'm happy to consider proposed solutions to the microplastic problem to the extent it is a problem. But first, you're going to have to explain to me, how is it a problem? And you can't just answer that side of the equation. You also have to answer, how is that problem, whatever it is, and however you can define it, how is that problem a larger problem than the problem of not being able to provide people with water when they need it? Because that's the problem that plastic water bottles solves. The combination of capping prices during an emergency and outlawing plastic water bottles is going to conspire to literally kill Minnesotans in the event of one of these adverse market conditions. Because one of the things people need very desperately when there's an emergency is water. And what you're saying is that, number one, the most convenient way to deliver it to them, you're taking off the table and making it illegal. We can't do it that way. And then number two, we're going to cap the price that people can charge for the product and service of bringing the water to them in the first place. This is kind of an overall problem with the whole green concept, the whole environmental concept, is that they only ever focus on one side of the equation and they completely ignore the other side, which is it's not as though we put water in plastic bottles because we don't care about the environment. That's not why we're doing it. We're putting water in plastic bottles because it's the best practice for transporting it and getting it in people's hands so that they can actually drink it. We're not running coal power plants because we hate the earth and hate the air and hate the water and want the environment to go bad. That's not why we're doing it. We're doing it because it's a cheap, reliable, abundant energy source that allows us to turn on our lights and heat our homes and keep from dying. That's why we're doing it. And those things are important. It's important to be able to live. It's important to be able to function in a society. It's important to have civilization. And it might be more important to do those things, to live, to breathe, to eat, to exist. It might be more important to do those things than to make sure there aren't microplastics in the water. Maybe.
And I want to get into some of the details and definitions in the bill, so listeners can understand the how this bill was crafted. It is a prohibition. It's prohibited that a manufacturer, wholesaler, or retailer sells or offers for sale bottled water in Minnesota. So your example of an emergency where they want to bring in pallets of water bottles, they can do that as long as it's free and they're not selling it. Right. This only prohibits the sale of water if the bottle is 2 liters or less. So you could still offer gallons of water for sale. It doesn't apply to distilled, deionized mineral water, carbonated sparkling water, tonic water, or water to which flavoring is added. So if you're a water retailer out there, I would recommend flavoring your water, calling it ice flavoring, and just putting an ice cube in the bottle before you bottle it, and it's flavored with ice or something like that. But of course, it doesn't apply to pop, right? Sugary sodas, all this kind of stuff, still allowed to be sold. This is just small bottles of pure water to which nothing is added. So the penalties are $50 for each prepackaged saleable unit offered for sale. So if a retailer has those 32 packs, it's going to cost them a lot of money. If there's just one of those sitting on the shelf, and then $500 maximum. And yeah, Attorney General it basically says that the Attorney General is going to be enforcing this. So Ellison and his goon squad, again, will be stripping retailers of their right to sell bottles of water.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's the type of stuff that Keith Ellison loves to be involved in. Is anything that involves the harassment of folks who are just trying to conduct business and bring products and services to market and live normal lives. Those are the folks that Keith Ellison is deeply concerned about getting into their grill and finding them and making their life a living hell. Criminals on the street, however, we need to make sure that they are as comfortable as humanly possible.
Yep. I wanted to touch base on some gun bills. Obviously, the red flag laws and the universal background check bills will probably be moving to the legislature as they have previously. But there's a new bill introduced this year that would require lawful gun owners to store their gun and ammunition separately in their house. No longer would someone be allowed to put their gun on their nightside table or in really in a safe next to their bed if there's if the gun is loaded. And so sheriffs across the state are speaking out against this bill. I think there's several dozen from several dozen counties across the state that have come out against that bill because and the basic premise of why you want to have a gun is for self-defense. And if you can't have a gun that is loaded, even if it's stored in a safe or somewhere you can get to quickly, it doesn't make any sense to have it, right? Criminals aren't going to follow this law, and they break into your house and they know it's going to take you 2 minutes to get your gun out of the safe and get your ammunition and load your gun. You're dead. Your family's done. And it defeats the whole purpose of the Second Amendment. And so this is a terrible bill. It's traveling through the legislature and very likely will pass unless Democrats start calling their legislators and asking them to back down on this terrible bill.
Yeah, it is an insane bill, and it's put forward by people who, Jamie Becker Finn, I believe, is the author, and she says she's a gun owner. She has a background as prosecutor. She's from a rural part of the state. And of course, they strategically pick the authors for their bills to kind of try to diffuse the argument of, oh, you're somebody who's out of touch with what it's like with gun culture and gun ownership. But I don't know. And maybe Representative Becker Finn has an answer to this question that I'm unaware of. I don't know that she's ever had to actually use her weapon while under active assault from somebody who's trying to hurt her or her family. But it doesn't take a use of force firearm expert or genius to understand that when seconds count, having your ammo somewhere other than your gun isn't going to do you a whole lot of good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way,
go ahead.
Under current law, under her bill repeals an existing law that already requires safe storage of firearms. So this is being portrayed as there's just guns lying around. You could just pick one up off the street. You can reach into the back of a guy's pickup truck and just find guns, and that's totally legal. And no. Under current law, you have to secure your weapons. It's just not that you have to keep them separate, unloaded, locked, and separated from the ammo. This takes it to a whole nother level.
Well, you and I both know that just because there's a law saying that you have to keep your gun safe doesn't mean people keep them safe. I mean, there are dozens of accidental discharges every year because some kid finds a gun that's laying around. But the idea that it has to be locked separately from the ammo all the time, the implication of this also gives police the right to come in and inspect your guns. Whenever you have a law that's being proposed, you have to also ask yourself as a legislator, how is this going to be enforced? Is it going to give police the ability to say, you know what, we're going to go bother Walter Hudson today, and we're going to go knock on his door and ask him to show us all of his weapons. And we're going to see if they're actually stored correctly. And if they're not, we can hand out a fine or whatever this is, a gross misdemeanor or something. I hope it's not a felony. But that's what the enforcement mechanism is, that would give people the ability to come in basically shake you down to make sure that your weapons are secure, and that's wrong. You got another statement on this one? We'll jump.
Well, I was just going to say that you look at this bill and the other bills that they're forwarding that are anti-gun bills. What they do is they try to, well, forget about what they're trying to do. The actual effect of these bills is to present lawful, law-abiding gun owners with so much legal hazard, where it becomes so hazardous to you personally to own the gun that you just decide not to own it. That's what they're really going for here. That it becomes completely impractical. This bill in particular makes it entirely impractical to be a gun owner for the purposes of self-defense. Because if you can't have your gun loaded, then it's no good to you in a self-defense situation. Yep. And so they're taking away the reason to own a gun, and then they're providing all of this legal hazard for owning a gun. And obviously the objective of all of that is to convince you that you shouldn't own guns.
Well, the obvious exception to this bill would be if you have your gun on your person. And so having like a pajama holster or something where you can sleep with your gun would allow you to keep your gun loaded in with you. I want to transition into another bill, but I want to give a shout out to Shane Meckland for carrying House File 657, which is a clone of a bill that I wrote a few sessions ago that prohibits the government from denying guns to people who are on the medical cannabis registry. Because federally, marijuana is still illegal. And even if you are lawfully using it under state law, you can't even get a gun. You can't own a gun. You have to give up your gun. You can't buy ammunition. You can't go hunting. Is a pretty serious implication for over 50,000 Minnesotans that are on the medical cannabis registry, many of them veterans. And so thanks, Shane, for carrying that bill. Now that we touched on guns and marijuana, I want to talk about the House File 100, which is the omnibus cannabis bill. Somehow it takes, I don't know, what is it, like 150, 250 pages to legalize marijuana. 262 pages. It's an enormous bill. And it's just obviously if you want to legalize marijuana in the state, you have to regulate it in some manner, like alcohol, I think would make sense. You have, you're setting up, distributors, wholesaler, growers, distributors, retailers, and to license people, and to, offer a tax like alcohol. But this bill seems to go way beyond that. I know it's made a ton of committee stops, which is a good thing, right? It goes through a lot, letting all these committees improve it. But I think by the time it comes to the floor, it's going to be quite the monstrosity, and even much worse than it was a couple of years ago when the Republicans held the Senate and they were trying to make some changes that the top Republicans would like. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I have not taken a deep dive look into the particulars of House File 100, the marijuana bill, so I can only speak to it anecdotally in terms of what I've been hearing about it. It is a huge bill. Even just scrolling through it quickly is extraordinarily daunting. I can tell you that what I'm hearing from constituents when I talked to them about this, I had a group in here I actually don't think they were my constituents, but they were from a neighboring district. They have employees that are constituents of mine, but they're a major bottling industry player. And so they deal in alcohol. They deal in intoxicating liquor. And their point on this bill was simply, if you're going to do this, legislature, treat them the same way you treat us. Have that 3-tier system. It's an intoxicating substance, so treat it the same way you treat our intoxicating substance. Similarly, I've heard people who have compared this to tobacco and are asking rational questions along the lines of, why are we going to tax this differently than we tax tobacco? Why are we going to treat this differently than we treat tobacco? It's literally something you smoke, right? So all the same concerns medically that you would have with tobacco, presumably you should also have with marijuana in terms of something that you are setting on fire and inhaling into your lungs. Why is it being treated differently? And those are some just kind of comparison commentaries that I'm hearing from constituents. But overall, living where I live, conservative Wright County, people aren't for this. They don't want to live in a state. They don't want to live in Colorado. They don't want to live in a state where marijuana is something that you have to take into consideration in the workplace, in hiring, in dealing with folks in the market, that this is just going to be part of our life now. Because unlike alcohol, where you can go out on a bender the night before and sleep it off and come into work the next day and be relatively fine, marijuana is a little less predictable and certainly not as accurate to detect either for purposes of enforcement, driving while impaired. So it opens up all of these areas of consideration that have not been thoroughly vetted. And we're just, like everything they're doing around here, going headlong off the cliff with this thing without really thinking it through. And it's going to be a Nancy Pelosi pass it to find out what's in it type situation, where regardless of even the legislative intent, what this bill actually does is going to be something we discover after they pass it. Signed into law.
I voted for the omnibus cannabis bill the last year that I was in the legislature, because we got a lot of good amendments onto the bill, especially around employment law, which I think is a really touchy subject. You need to allow employers to continue to discriminate against people that use cannabis, because as you said, if somebody goes out on their, they have their bender and alcohol gets out of their system pretty fast, but THC can be detected for a couple of days. And if you have a doctor that's recreating on Sunday and he operates on Monday and botches a surgery, the hospital can be held liable because the first thing they do is a drug test. So you have to allow employers the ability to discriminate. We have to understand how it's going to impact workplace liability, insurance, forklift operators, same kind of thing. It gets complicated. And one of the things that I bring up a lot is that the Senate Republicans passed a law allowing people to smoke marijuana so long as they're on the medical cannabis registry, which the registry has been expanded to include a lot of conditions. And so there's, intractable pain and things like that. So there's a lot of people in Minnesota that are today legally smoking marijuana. The problem is that police can't enforce it because you can't ask someone about their medical condition.
Right.
You can't ask them to give you, a license that they have for medical cannabis. You can't ask them to show you the prescription bottle that it came in. And so basically it's going unenforced today. And the way that law was passed, that the Republicans passed, you can smoke it in the car going down the road. You can't be driving because you can't be intoxicated like anything, but they passed that, and we're stuck here where we can't enforce it. This bill would at least give police the ability to get out and enforce it. So we'll see if this comes forward. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of ugly things. The last subject I wanted to talk about is what happened in Otter Tail County last week, or a couple weeks ago. We touched on it before, where there was a threat that they wouldn't seat delegates. I worked really hard to try to find someone to go up there and run the convention that would be fair. And they agreed to, and then the BPOU chair said they kind of had it under control and it wasn't going to get out of hand. It got out of hand. The chair and others and the executive committee voted to not seat 33 delegates that were duly elected at caucus to be delegates for the county, because they were claiming there was fraud during the caucus. After they left caucus, there were 30 or 40 names that were filled in on the empty slate for delegates. So those people weren't elected at caucus. They were just filled in by someone on the executive board. And they were claiming fraud during the endorsing process, because I think it was Rasmussen won by a small margin, and delegates were upset. They wanted to go back and elect new leadership in the BPOU, and the leadership decided they weren't going to seat those 33 elected delegates because they had a yard sign for the unendorsed candidate, or they contributed to them, or made a post on social media. They liked their post. We've seen this around the state, especially down in my district here too. There were threats that are out there for people that were liking, my posts when I ran in a primary. I think it's starting to tear the party apart. People from CD7 were asking me, what can we do and how do we get, leadership to be more ethical? I offered a constitutional amendment to the state party platform, or to the district party platform, that just basically says the CD7 executive committee shouldn't allow people to be on the board that actually have a job working for the elected official. And so we have that, in your district, where your party chair, who's supposed to run an open and transparent endorsing process, has a 6-figure job working for the congressman. And it creates a conflict of interest, even if there isn't. There's obviously a conflict of interest, but it certainly gives the appearance of a conflict, even if he can prove there isn't one. Right? You want to remove that. And we had the same issue when Jennifer Carnahan was party chair and Jim Hagedorn was running down here and Carla Nelson was running for the endorsement. I was the chair. It created a lot of conflict. And so in order to remove those conflicts, setting up rules to say you can't be a family member of an elected person in a BPOU or whatever that you represent would be a way to bring some more ethics to this process, because I don't want people to divide or tear down the party. We need to get together on the same, on the same side of things.
Well, I think, it might be simpler than that, right? So, so you bring up CD6 and our chair being a staff member on the congressional staff, which is true. Does that create an appearance of impropriety? It may. People may have that perception. At the same time, he was elected to that position, right? So when we look at those 33 delegates who had their credentials revoked, they were duly elected by their caucus. And so perhaps a simpler way because I too am noodling, and I haven't had the opportunity to talk to anybody at the state party or even higher up within the caucus. But I am eager to kind of get to the bottom of this Otter Tail situation, and not Otter Tail specifically, but this type of thing that seems to keep happening, where we keep intervening, or perhaps a way to put it is we keep denying due process to folks who are entitled to it. If you're elected as a delegate from a caucus to a BPOU convention, that is binding. It should be regarded as binding. I have an election certificate to the House of Representatives. Nobody can just decide that doesn't matter, right? I got elected, so I'm the guy. Now, there is a process, and we talked about it last episode. There is a process to remove me in spite of my election certificate if I get completely out of hand. But it's a very methodical, due process, and it's targeted at a specific person engaged for specific credible reasons. The idea that you're going to take 33 people and just invalidate their credentials based upon trumped up charges of, they liked a post on social media. That's ridiculous. That's insane. That stuff, those things that you're objecting to, let's put it this way. Whether you're objecting to Bobby Benson's status as an employee of Tom Emmer for Congress, or you're objecting to a delegate in Otter Tail County liking a social media post for somebody who wasn't endorsed, both of those things are material evidences that ought to inform a delegate's vote on that person. They are not reasons to overturn the process that was already determined through due election.
Yeah,
and that's what we need to get to.
And I'm not suggesting that they get thrown out, but what I'm suggesting is that you could pass. People are like, what should we do? And I said, well, you can propose a constitutional amendment to the congressional district's party platform next month, and just say, going forward, anybody that wants to run for election for chair can't be working for the campaign, can't be on the official side. And I would say, I like Bobby. He, this isn't a problem that I see directly, but Tom Emmer voted for or supported the national popular vote. Okay, was one of his positions. How do you go to the party chair and say, hey, you need to tell him to back off, or we need to organize a door knocking on that? Bobby can't do that because he works for Emmer, right? So there's a conflict of interest that comes up where part of the party chair's job is to elect the endorsed candidate. Part of the party chair's job is to hold that legislator accountable to the platform of the party and not let them run too far to the left. And so I just said this is a proposal that you could offer to these grassroots activists in CD7, some folks in CD1. We're asking for something similar. Change the process. You have an opportunity to do that as a delegate if you're seated. But if you bring this thing forward and the party leaders find out that these activists are going to bring it forward, I hope to hell they don't invalidate the credentials of those people like they did in Otter Tail County and Clay County and in Little Falls and things like that. So that's how I want to wrap that up. But Walter, I know you've got a hard stop here, so I'll let you go. And I want to appreciate, I do appreciate you spending time with us to explain some of these bills. And we'll talk to you next week again on the Omnibus podcast, where all subjects are germane. 1,000-page omnibus bills that nobody knows what's in it.